Hello and welcome. My name is Rob Simonds, and I am the president of the Harvard Club of Seattle. And as some of you know, I was a professional violinist for most of my career, and I'm thrilled to present violinist Rachel Lee Priday, who the club is going to go hear perform on March 13th at the University of Washington. Rachel is an amazing violinist. She's a Harvard College grad, class of 2010, and a graduate of the New England Conservatory. Her teachers include Itzhak Perlman, and we actually share some lineage in that we both studied with Dorothy Delay and Wan Bin Yim at different times. I'm a huge admirer of her playing, her fearless programming, and her generous spirit as a teacher. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk with you.
So as I just mentioned, you are a Harvard University grad. And so when you went to school, you were obviously very serious about the violin already. And I'm wondering how you thought about balancing serious practice and your academic work.
Honestly, I wouldn't call it balancing. I was surviving, and I was very busy, especially just right off the bat. When I was a freshman, I remember the first week of school when we had our orientation, I was in the basement practicing. I flew to Germany the next week and had my debut there in Berlin. And so I was just focused on the concerts that I had. And really, it didn't let up until I remember kind of freshman spring, because I remember looking back and seeing that I hadn't been on campus continuously for more than 2 weeks at a time the entire year. So it was very intense. I remember just taking books on the road, my reading on the road with me. I took the Amtrak a lot because I would go for lessons to New York still, because I was still studying with Itzhak Perlman at the time, and I would go play my repertoire for pieces that I had coming up for him. So yeah, I remember writing Shakespeare papers on the Amtrak, and I think that academically, I didn't put pressure on myself. I really looked at college as sort of, you know, trying to gain experience outside of music and to really become more well-rounded, as they say. And so I think I just gravitated towards classes that I enjoyed. And so that helped a lot, where I didn't feel that I needed to perform and academically and have that added pressure. But I was very busy, and so I think by sophomore year, I took a little bit of a step back and realized, wow, I'm here at Harvard. I should really immerse myself more.
So along those lines, so I went to a more traditional music school where every accommodation is made to practice. But I think what you're touching on is that as you settled into school, you started seeing this whole big wide world out there academically and culturally. I wonder how that campus environment at Harvard might have opened your mind to a musical world that you might not have experienced had you been in a more traditional conservatory environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think more so um, than the actual content maybe of the classes is just that I was really inspired by my colleagues. I was inspired by, of course, the faculty. I was inspired by my classmates and just their approach to making connections outside of music in terms of their outside interests. And so and everybody was so passionate and everybody was so confident and driven in how they wanted to really change the world and leave a mark. And I think that for me, just kind of soaking up that energy and being in that environment maybe had even more of an impact. And I did end up studying English literature, so I think that sort of interdisciplinary thinking and
So thinking about the interdisciplinary idea and being inspired by the faculty and your peers, how does that spill over to your relationship with living composers? So, we think about it's not just reading from the score, taking the text at face value. It is a more collaborative process. Talk to me about how being a proponent and advocate of contemporary music is a big part of your overall artistry.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I think that there's kind of this false divide between old and new music. I think there's discussion of the canon, there's, who's included, who's not. And of course, so much is changing in a very positive direction where I think more so now than ever, we're really questioning what our assumptions are about representation in the canon and who gets to decide what. And, aside from that, I think that, my approach to my role as an interpreter is the same, whether it's a piece that's been played probably 100,000 times or even more, and a brand new piece or a piece that I've commissioned. And so I really try to treat everything with the same sort of respect for the score, respect for the composer's intention, and for also the power of the music to stand on its own and to really speak and communicate to the audience. And so, yeah, I think that whether it's old or new or something that I've played a lot before, it's really kind of the same process. The only difference is that when the composer is living, you get an eye into the creation of the piece, and sometimes you do get to have input in it. And so some composers are really collaborative, where they might workshop a piece with you and send you material that they're working on, and you can get feedback, etc. And the other aspect that's really helpful for me, and that I wish I had access to, composers of the past, is just that, when you're in a room with a composer, you can sort of feel how they feel the music, and not everything can be conveyed in a score with as much precision as you would hope, because say they might give you some markings or directions, but really just sometimes hearing the composer, the way that they sing their own melody, or the way that they feel the pacing of something, if they're a instrumentalist themselves, the way that they play their own music or music of other composers, really is sort of that unspoken element that you can absorb from just being around the composers. And so I think that's a really special privilege to have access to. And so that for me is one of the main differences, but the job that I do in terms of trying to bring it to life, I try to think is ideally the same.
I'm a number of years older than you, and when I was in school, I came into school in the 90s, and at the tail end of the big divide between serial music, like 12-tone music, and like downtown music, so to speak. And while atonal music had long since sailed by the time I was in school, there were some of the professors were still of that guard, and were still defending like hyper modernist, hyper dissonant music. And the more accessible trends were starting to come into vogue. And throughout my professional career, those things became like the norm, like composers who were really thinking about audiences. And you end up finding like there's a peer group with you and all these other composers who are of like mind or similar age. I wonder, and you take a very ecumenical view in your repertoire of the types of music you play, but I wonder what you would say is the common thread between the composers that you choose to work with.
Yeah, I would say that they have a sense still of some narrative,
Hmm.
and stylistically, I would say a lot of them have had minimalist bents, and that could just be a factor of that style of composition being prevalent.
Hmm.
But uh, there's something a little bit intangible. When you hear something, it's like that feels durable to me. Like it feels not like an affectation. It feels authentic. Like the composers really have their own voice. And so when I commission something, I try not to get too involved with making micro decisions
Hmm.
or anything. I really just find somebody that I trust, and let them make the best piece that they can. And I think that gives the best result.
Hmm. So for this concert in March with UW, you're doing something a little bit that blends both worlds, where you're performing a work by a violin concerto by Karłowicz, a Polish composer, but of the Romantic tradition. Fun fact: the music director of UW, David Robbie, who I know probably chose this piece for this performance because he introduced it to me. He and I were in youth orchestra together back in the '90s in Boston. Um, I wonder though, what's it like presenting a work in an older tradition, but is very unfamiliar to the audiences? I mean, there's no real interpretive tradition with this music because it's been recorded, but not like the other pieces. And so I wonder how you approach it, and maybe how much freedom do you have in interpreting a work in this tradition?
Yeah, actually, these days I feel like having too much tradition is a burden. um, when you're a student, I think you're learning a language. And the more you hear of others' work, and the more instruction you're given, the more information you're given, the more that you can piece together your sense of the language and begin to speak the language as well. And I think because this piece is not in an unfamiliar language, I mean, the first thing that you try to do is sort of situate it relative to other music that you know of, and this being kind of a late Romantic work. He was a Polish composer. Um, Very, very beautiful orchestration. There's a lot of kind of lushness in the way that he uses the orchestra. It's a big orchestra, like lots of yeah, lots of players, lots of players on stage, and you can hear little snippets of the influence of other composers. So that's what I try to do first, is I sort of relate it to languages that I already know. And then it becomes much easier to kind of make interpretive decisions. So yeah, I mean, I feel very at home with Romantic music in general. So that's not, a great mystery to me, and I feel comfortable, um, making some decisions and playing in a way that maybe I hadn't heard in the recording. Um, and I think the other aspect of it is just it gives you freedom to imagine how something can be different. And it's even easier if you haven't heard it before.
Yeah, there's that. But when you say you want to situate it relative to other composers of the period, like who would you say comes to mind if you were going to describe to somebody who is the more famous composer?
Yeah, so I would say I hear some Tchaikovsky in there for sure. I hear some moments of Dvorak, like kind of warm, cozy feel, but also, especially in the third movement, I hear sort of this wintry, sort of cozy feel as well.
Mhm.
He probably was very influenced by the late German romantics like Strauss and Wagner.
Mhm.
And I
Right.
also hear in the passage work, I hear some Vinyavsky. So
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how
yeah,
violinistic do you think it is?
it's pretty good.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, there are a couple moments where I think because he had to do it in a different key the second time, it doesn't work out as well. But in general, it's very comfortable to
Mhm.
play.
So speaking of like learning the big romantic tradition, you and I both were students of Dorothy Delay, who taught that music incredibly well, and she had an amazing and distinctive impact on American violinists. Now that you're a teacher yourself, what about her teaching has stayed with you the most? And what do you like when I, certainly speaking for myself, when I give instruction, which isn't as often as you, but when I give instruction, I can hear her words coming out of my mouth to my students.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two perspectives now. I mean, there was the little girl, Rachel, me,
Mhm.
because I met her when I was 7, and then I started
Mhm.
studying with her when I was 8,
Mhm.
and she passed away when I had just turned 13.
Right.
So all my experiences were when I was really young. And so there are things that I remember of her, no, mostly just kind of the way she made me feel,
Mhm.
which is that she was so gentle and so kind, and she would call people sugar plums. She would say, honey, I love the way that you played that. And I think it was just the way that she made me, even as a really young player, feel like I had something special and unique to say. And so it was just pure encouragement, and she really understood my psychology very well. It was almost like she was a mind reader. It was really incredible, the way that she could understand her students, and support them that way. So I have that kind of perspective, but then also being older now, I find that I rely on her methods immensely. I mean, now I look back, I'm like, she really formed my idea of how I think you should play the violin. I mean, I think that she was a proponent of the Galamian school of music. So, of course, Galamian and Delay together. But I mean, I still reference, she had these charts, like kind of a checklist that she made for each piece, and it would say kind of intonation, rhythm, pacing, everything that you needed to work on when you studied the piece to make sure that you had really improved it. And I still reference that. I reference her concerto sequence, and when I'm thinking about what repertoire to assign my students, I still use these bowing exercises. So
Mhm.
all kinds of just basic setup things. And most of all, I try to. I mean, my idea of what a master pedagogue is basically Dorothy Delay. So
I
the
wonder if
extent
you could say
that
more about the psychology. I will say, like, she, your experience as a 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kid, and her treating you with kindness and patience and calling you sugar plum. When I was in my late teens and early 20s, when I was studying with her, she would call me sugar plum, had endless patience, and had a lot of the same things. She had a sort of universal approach to her teaching. But the thing that I took away more than anything was that with the right approach to practicing, anything was possible. There was nothing that you couldn't do if you approached this problem deliberately and rationally.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really true, and I believe it's because she could probably teach anybody. I mean,
Mhm.
she could probably take anybody that, didn't traditionally have talent per se, and be able to turn them, like she had that ability to go from beginner to advanced. So I think, yeah, she inspired like just an incredible level of trust.
Yeah, to put it mildly, she had an enormous impact on my life. So you're now teaching yourself at University of Washington, but I wonder, at this stage of your career, you just got home from Ithaca, New York, from a last minute recital. So thank you for joining me after a long day of traveling. But with that in mind, I wonder how you think about your balancing of your performing, your own practicing, and your teaching.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really, so, sometimes they say give a busy person more work or something. If you need someone to do something, then I feel a little bit like that. But I'm really just, what keeps me going is that I'm honestly just really grateful every time that I do get to play something, even if it's for a small audience, even, regardless of what I'm playing, what the venue is, I just feel like it's such a privilege to be able to share music and to feel well enough to do that, to feel, it's a little dire sounding, but sometimes I think like, oh, because when I was starting out, I'd be like, oh, I'll probably play this piece 100 times in the future, and these numbers are greatly inflated. So now I realize, like, you know, you have to decide what you want to play. And, sometimes I don't decide. Sometimes I just say yes if somebody asks me to play something. But I feel like every time you have an opportunity to do it, you don't know, is this the last time? And that's not to make it sad, because maybe I will play it again, but it just makes every time special. And it gives me the energy to feel like I really want to make this special, like in the way that I'm playing it right now. And I think that the teaching really goes hand in hand with playing as well. I think that I do hope that my performing helps me to become a better teacher. And actually, selfishly, I think that teaching has helped me understand things in a way that helps me become a better artist as well. So,
Can you say more about that? Is it just the time on task, thinking about things through the eyes of another person? How has teaching made you a better artist?
I think that it helps you get out of your own head,
Hmm.
and it gives you a little bit of distance so that I can really just observe. I can observe, and then I feel like I've become more like a doctor who can diagnose things a lot faster. So, I can observe something and understand more quickly what the core of maybe the musical or technical issue is. And then when that makes sense to me, then it comes across in my playing as well. They say if you can explain something to somebody else, then you know it much better, or
Hmm.
an adage like that. And actually, I saw recently Dorothy Delay, there was a quote by her where she said, you can teach anything if you know how people learn it. And that quote actually blew me away because it just shows how in the mind of the learner she is.
Hmm.
I thought she would say something like, if you can explain it, then you know it, like everybody says. I feel like I'm on that level, and I feel like she's on the next level where she
I
understands.
think what if I may put words in her mouth. Well, actually, I won't put words in her mouth. I want to say something that she talked to me about. I think it was violence have a tendency to overcomplicate things.
Oh,
You
sure,
can make
yeah.
the concept that, I think about that Glenn Gould, the great Canadian pianist, would say, I could tell you everything you need to know about playing the piano in 30 minutes. I couldn't teach you to play in 30 minutes, but I could go through the basic mechanics of it in 30 minutes or so. And I remember going to Miss DeLay and asking her about something I was really struggling with. This concept. It was about, I can tell you what it was about. It was about bow weight, particularly like arm weight versus bow weight, not to get too in the weeds. And I was talking to her about not really understanding the mechanics of it. And she said something to me like, Sugar Plum, if you want the dumbest answer about violin technique, ask of another violinist. But her point was we were making it so complicated. I'm not going to go into the weeds, but she kind of took the bow out and said, look, here's a lever. You can apply pressure here or you can apply pressure here. That's at the end of the day. Go home and practice. You'll figure it out. But there is this, I think sometimes we make it more complicated than it needs to be. And her point being that if you can understand what the person needs in that moment, that they can take that information, that simple information, and go home and turn it into something bigger, without getting in their own way by turning into some great metaphysical experiment.
Yeah, I remember she would just say one thing to me that I thought was totally unrelated. She'd be like, Sugar Plum, let me show you this one thing, and just go home and do it. And, I didn't always do it. So I wish that I would just have followed through with that even a little bit more than I did. But yeah, that's totally. She would plant a seed and watch it grow, and I think that was her approach.
Well, I think that's a great place to end this before we get too into the weeds about violin technique. So again, we're going to hear Rachel perform on March 13th at the University of Washington with the orchestra there with David Robbie conducting. And we'll meet with Rachel briefly before the concert to hear a few words about her performance coming up before she hits the stage. So make sure you get your tickets soon. We don't have very many left. So thank you, Rachel, for your time, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much. Looking forward.